everybody. Today I'm going to share with you my top 5 tips that I think are super important to help you succeed in writing poetry. I'm Hannah and welcome to my channel, A Lyrical Lifeline. So I've been writing poetry since I was about 8 years old, and I really wanted to make this video because when I was a young teenager sat in my bedroom trying to write a poem, I would look for this kind of thing to help me when I was starting out. But first of all, I just want to say that the tips I am going to share are the ones I've personally found to be really useful. You know, just the things I've found myself coming back to again and again. Now, most of these tips are things I've picked up from being part of writers groups or specific things I've learned from poetry mentors. I really hope you enjoy. I really believe that your heart and soul is the best starting point for poetry. Just write with honesty and never back away from your true emotions. For me, truth is what creates authenticity in writing and also what creates that realism for the listener. So when you're writing, it's worth it just to take a raw emotion and unpick the story that's surrounding it. Audience, they can just feel your passion when it comes from a true place. They know it's sincere and they can connect to that honest vulnerability. Now for me, poetry started as therapy. I literally wanted to transfer this mess that was in my head down onto paper. It's so powerful to help you get perspective. And looking back on my poetry, it's like it's a time capsule of all the heavy emotion I've been through. A stream of consciousness is a really good way to write from the heart. For those of you that don't know, this is a technique used in literacy where the emotions and thoughts of a character are written out so that the reader can understand their mental state. For want of a better word, it's an interior monologue. So as a poet, when you're doing a stream of consciousness, you basically just keep writing. Keep writing and do not stop until all the questions, the worries, the ideas that are swirling around in your head are just released onto paper. The key is just to let it happen. Let it all flow out, and soon enough, you're going to have a bunch of potential material on your page that you can then reshape into poetry. It may seem really obvious, but keeping a notebook at all times is so useful. When inspiration strikes, you can just scribble it down, and there's something so liberating about having that. This here is my current notebook. I take these little penguins everywhere. So even if it's an idea that you never end up using, just still jot it down, because chances are you will probably forget. Trust me, I've been at work, on a train, on a run, and an idea's come to me and I've thought, yeah, I'll write that down when I get home. And then the time comes and, of course, I've completely drawn a blank. So anything that you get excited about as a line or an idea, just jot it down. Do your future self a favour. Also, keeping lists within your notebook is a really good thing. I have pages and pages in here that are just bullet points of themes, ideas, subject matters that I really want to talk about. So those lists are a really great starting point for a new piece. And one other thing, just take your time to write. Your creativity cannot be rushed. The reality is that some poems, they can just take ages. Ages, like months to be finished. At the writers groups, I got really annoyed at myself if I couldn't finish a poem as quickly as the others. I thought it made me a bad poet just because it didn't flow out as natural for me. But I just soon had to realise that everybody's creative pace is different. And even slow crafted progression is still progression. And at the end of the day, your poem can come out stronger because of that extra time. So yeah, my point is, do not worry if an idea or part of a poem has been in your notebook for too long. Do not worry, it will come to light eventually. From your free write or your stream of consciousness, it will become clear naturally what your poem's about, but I think the next step is just finding a little bit of structure and organising your writing through a few creative decisions. Some important questions I like to ask myself is just things like, what do I want the listener to take away from the piece? What's the style, the tone, the mood? And I guess a massive one for me is, what's my relatable element and how can I explore that further? Also, where's my story arc? And just why am I writing this poem? What's its purpose? So of course poetry should be all kinds of freedom, but I think defining the structure through these little creative decisions will really strengthen your work. Editing. It's such a massive part of the writing process. For me, editing is all about making things clearer. It really is that time to consider how the listener will understand and respond to your work. So editing can be as much about sacrificing as it can be tweaking and expanding. We all know in poetry sometimes it's really easy to over-describe. Sometimes we get a bit carried away, so editing is that chance to strip it back a little bit to make it clearer. Get rid of all unnecessary words, lines, phrases. Simplifying things can strengthen the impact. You really don't want to overcomplicate an image by having too many descriptive words. Reading out loud is by far the best way to edit your poetry. It's really important to hear how the words flow, and then you can also pick out what sounds messy or clunky. Of course, you could read it to a friend. That's really useful because then they can point out from an outside perspective what made sense to them and what didn't. I also want to mention editing as you go along. I found this really works for me. Traditionally, as a writer, you're taught that you have to have a full-length poem before you start editing, but I really don't think that's the case. See, I'll often write a verse of a poem, and before I carry on writing, I'll start editing it. I get really giddy and excited when I make these tweaks and just knowing I've made it sound better, and that's what then motivates me to finish the poem. If editing does become a little bit of a struggle, it's worth it just to take a step back, go have a cup of tea and then readdress it. I think it's natural instinct to know when a poem's finished being edited. It kind of just screams at you, I'm done now. Finally, my last point on editing is just something for a little bit of fun. I like to pick out what I think my striking line is. My mentors always taught me that pretty much every poem has that one line that will just hit you really hard. Of course, that can be different from person to person, depending on what resonates with them. But I think in your editing, it's really good practice just to pick that out for yourself. You know, it's just nice sometimes to acknowledge that and to really be proud of what you've crafted. I guess this last one is more of a mental tip rather than a writing tool, and I really can't stress it enough. Don't compare yourself to other poets. Just don't, it's really not worth it. Of course, it's amazing to be inspired by other poets, and everyone should be looking at other poets for influence, but to compare yourself, it's just a completely different thing, and it can be really damaging. Like, so many times I've held myself back by thinking, my poetry's not as good as theirs, what's the point of putting it out? But it just took me ages to accept that it's different. It's not that my poem's not as good, it's not that at all, it's just completely different. Like, I can't sound like the American slam poets that I love so much. I just can't. That wouldn't be authentic. Everyone has their own unique style and identity that they have to learn to channel. Everybody's voice is very different. So please know, your poetry is good enough. You are good enough. Your story deserves to be told. So you should never devalue yourself by comparing yourself to another poet. That's just something I wish I'd learned a little bit quicker, but I thought that was really important to share. So there you have it, my top 5 tips for writing poetry. Hopefully one or two of these will help you in your journey. So do let me know in the comments section if you have tips that work really well for you. I'd love to hear how others create. So yeah, thanks for watching, get writing, and if you do like what you've just seen, reach out or you can check out some of the original poetry on my channel. Thank you, bye!